Look, I need to be honest with you right from the start. I have been teaching at the Coloreth Military Academy for 17 cycles now, and I thought I had seen everything. Every species, every technique, every cultural quirk that the galaxy could possibly throw at a weapons instructor, but that was before the humans showed up. My name is Vorath, and I teach advanced blade crafting to the most promising young warriors from across 12 star systems. The Academy sits on a moon called Terthos Prime, which orbits a gas giant so massive that the sunrises look like something out of a fever dream. Beautiful place, deadly curriculum. Perfect combination, if you ask me. The semester I am about to tell you about started like any other. 63 students filed into my workshop on the first day, their scales, fur, feathers, and various other biological coverings gleaming under the harsh workshop lights. I recognized most of the species. Coloreth, obviously, that is us. We are the founders, the ones who built this whole operation. Then there were the Vorthax, with their 6 arms that make them absolute nightmares in close combat. A handful of Kelpri, those floating gas bags who somehow make excellent strategists despite having no bones whatsoever. And then, standing in the back corner looking absolutely tiny compared to everyone else, there was her, Mira Kane, the human. Now, I had heard about humans before, sure, who had not? They had only been part of the Galactic Council for about 3 cycles, and already they were making waves. Loud waves. The kind that make admirals nervous and politicians start updating their insurance policies. But I had never actually met one face to face until that moment. She could not have been more than 5.5 feet tall, which put her at chest height to most of my students. No natural armor, no claws, no venom sacs or electromagnetic pulse organs or anything remotely useful for combat. Just soft, pinkish skin, brown hair tied back in some sort of functional knot, and these weird little eyes that seemed to absorb everything around her without giving anything away in return. I remember thinking, this is going to be interesting. And by interesting, I mean a complete disaster. The first day of my class always follows the same pattern. I give the speech, the students pretend to listen, and then we get to work. The speech is important, though. It sets the tone. I stood at the front of the workshop, my claws clicking against the metal podium, and addressed the room. My voice echoed off the stone walls, which were decorated with weapons from 1,000 different cultures. Swords, axes, polearms, things that do not even have names in most languages. Welcome to advanced blade crafting, I said, letting my mandibles spread wide in what most species recognize as a smile. Some of the students flinched. Good. Fear keeps you focused. You are here because someone somewhere decided you have potential. Whether that decision was correct or not, well, we shall find out together. A few nervous laughs rippled through the class. The human girl in the back did not laugh. She just watched me with those unnerving eyes. In this course, you will learn the ancient art of weapon forging. I continued, pacing back and forth across the platform, not just how to use a blade, but how to create one. How to understand its balance, its weight, its soul. Because yes, a truly great weapon has a soul. It becomes an extension of your body, your will, your very essence. I paused for dramatic effect. I am good at dramatic effects. The final examination for this course is simple, I announced. You will forge your own blade from raw materials to finished product. You will use any techniques you have learned, any cultural traditions you bring with you, any innovations you can think of, and then you will demonstrate its effectiveness in combat. More nervous shifting. Bornax in the 3rd row started clicking her mandibles anxiously. Now, I slammed one claw against the podium, making everyone jump. Let us talk about materials. I activated the holographic display behind me, which showed dozens of different metals, alloys, and composites floating in glowing blue light. Throughout history, warriors have used whatever materials their planets provided: iron, steel, titanium, durasteel, crystallized carbon lattices, plasma-fused alloys. The list goes on and on. In this academy, you have access to our materials vault, which contains samples from hundreds of worlds. Choose wisely, because your choice of material will determine everything about how your blade performs. That is when she raised her hand. The human girl, Mira, just lifted one small hand into the air like she was asking permission to use the bathroom. I stopped mid-sentence, genuinely confused. In 17 cycles of teaching, I could count on one claw the number of times a student had interrupted my first day speech. "Yes?" I said, my voice probably sharper than it needed to be. "Sir," she said, and her voice was surprisingly calm for someone surrounded by beings who could literally tear her apart without breaking a sweat. "What if we want to use materials that are not in the vault?" I blinked at her, all four of my eyes, one after another. "I just explained that the vault contains materials from hundreds of worlds. What exactly do you think is missing?" "Oh, I do not think anything is missing, sir." She smiled, and there was something about that smile that made my scales itch. "I was just wondering if we are allowed to use, other things. If we find them, other things," I repeated slowly. "Yes, sir, other things." I stared at her for a long moment, trying to figure out if this was some sort of human joke I was not equipped to understand. Finally, I just waved one claw dismissively. "As long as your material can actually be forged into a functional blade, I do not care what you use." Students have used some very unconventional materials over the cycles. One Kelpie even made a sword out of compressed gas. It was absolutely useless in combat, but points for creativity. She nodded, still smiling that strange smile. "Thank you, sir. I should have known right then, should have recognized the warning signs. But hindsight is always clearer than foresight, as they say." The next few weeks proceeded normally. Well, as normally as anything proceeds at a military academy where half the students can breathe fire and the other half have toxic blood. I taught them the basics of metallurgy, heat treatment, edge geometry, all the foundational knowledge they would need. They took notes. They asked questions. They practiced on scrap materials until their technique improved from absolute garbage to merely terrible. Mira participated in everything. She was not the strongest student, obviously. Her arms were laughably weak compared to even the smallest Caloreth. But she paid attention. She listened. She watched the demonstrations with an intensity that honestly made me a little uncomfortable. And she spent a lot of time in the biological sciences wing. Now that struck me as odd. The biosciences building was on the complete opposite side of the campus from the forge workshops. There was literally no reason for a blade crafting student to be over there. But I started hearing reports from my colleagues. Mira Kine, the human, checking out books on xenobiology. Mira Kine requesting access to the anatomy labs. Mira Kine asking very specific questions about skeletal structures across different species. I asked her about it one day after class. She was cleaning up her workstation, carefully organizing her tools in a way that suggested military training. Everything had its place. Everything was perfectly aligned. "Mira," I said, trying to sound casual, "I have been hearing that you spend quite a bit of time in the biosciences wing." "Yes, sir." She did not even look up from her organizing. "Mind if I ask why?" "Research, sir." "Research for what exactly?" Now she did look up, and there was that smile again. "For my blades, sir." I felt one of my mandibles twitch. "Your blade is a weapons project, not a biology project." "I know, sir, but I like to understand what I am working with. The materials vault has complete molecular analyses of every substance in storage. Whatever you choose, you will understand it perfectly." "I appreciate that, sir. But I am not using anything from the vault." There it was, confirmation. I crossed my upper arms over my thorax, while my lower arms rested on my hips. It is an intimidating posture, or at least it usually is. Mira just kept smiling. "You are aware," I said slowly, "that the final examination requires a functional blade, not a project, not a biology experiment, a weapon that can actually be used in combat." "Yes, sir. I am very aware. And you are confident that whatever mysterious material you are planning to use will meet those requirements?" "Extremely confident, sir." I wanted to push harder, to demand that she tell me what she was planning, but technically she had not broken any rules. I had said students could use whatever materials they wanted, as long as they could forge them into a functional blade. And I pride myself on being a fair instructor. You set the parameters, you stick to them. So I just grunted and walked away, telling myself that whatever the human was planning, it would probably fail during the forging process, and she would have to start over with something sensible. Spoiler alert, I was catastrophically wrong about that. The weeks turned into months. The other students gradually completed their research phases and began the actual forging process. The workshops filled with the sounds of hammering, The hiss of superheated metal hitting cooling baths, the occasional yelp when someone burned themselves despite wearing protective gear. A Vornax named Kelix forged a beautiful curved blade from titanium alloy, with 6 different grips, so she could wield it with any combination of her arms. A Caloreth named Thornick went traditional, using the same folded steel techniques that our people have been using for thousands of cycles. Even the Kelpris student, whose name I still cannot pronounce without 3 throat sacs, managed to create something halfway functional out of hardened resin. Mira, meanwhile, still had not started forging. She attended every class. She took every test. She participated in every practical exercise. But her workstation remained empty. No materials. No tools laid out. No plans sketched on data tablets. Nothing. The other students started noticing. I heard the whispers when they thought I was not listening. What is the human doing? She has not even chosen a material yet. Maybe humans do not know how to forge. I heard they are a primitive species. Maybe she does not understand the assignment. That last comment came from Kelix, the Vornax girl, and it made me irrationally angry. Humans were a lot of things, but primitive was not one of them. You do not go from discovering fire to achieving faster than light travel in under 10,000 cycles if you are primitive. That is practically a speed run by galactic standards. But I did not defend Mira. That was not my job. My job was to teach blade crafting, and she was not crafting anything. 2 weeks before the final examination, I called her into my office. My office is a small room attached to the main workshop, with walls covered in certificates, commendations, and photographs of past students holding their finished blades. I sat behind my desk, which was really just a reinforced table big enough to hold my bulk, and gestured for Mira to take the seat across from me. She sat down, folding her hands in her lap, and waited. "Mira," I began, trying to keep my voice neutral, "the final examination is in 14 days. "Yes, sir, I am aware. And you have not begun forging your blade." "That is correct, sir. In fact, you have not even shown me your chosen material." "Also correct, sir." I leaned forward, my claws scraping against the table surface. "Mira, I am going to be very direct with you. If you do not have a functional blade to present in 14 days, you will fail this course. Failing this course means expulsion from the academy. Expulsion means you go home in disgrace, having wasted an entire semester and a significant amount of your government funding. Do you understand the gravity of this situation?" "I understand completely, sir." "Then why," I said, my voice rising despite my best efforts to stay calm, "have you not started working?" She looked at me for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she reached into the bag she always carried and pulled out something wrapped in dark cloth. "Because, sir," she said quietly, "I have been working. Just not here." She unwrapped the cloth and I felt every scale on my body stand up straight. It was bone. Not just any bone, a long, curved piece of skeletal material that still had the polished appearance of something that had been alive relatively recently. It was approximately 2 feet long, thick at one end and tapering to the other, with a natural curve that suggested it had come from something large and predatory. "What?" I said very slowly. "Is that—" "This is a femur from a Krothak hunting beast," Mira said, running one finger along the bone with what looked like genuine affection. "They are native to the moon where we are right now, actually. Tirthos Prime has a whole ecosystem that most people do not even know about in the lower valleys. The Krothak are apex predators, 10 feet tall at the shoulder, razor-sharp claws, bite force that could crush durasteel. This particular one died about 6 months ago in a territorial dispute with another Krothak. Natural causes, more or less. No hunting involved. The body was still pretty intact when I found it last week. I just stared at her, then at the bone, then back at her. "You have got to be joking," I finally managed. "No, sir. Not joking. Mira, that is a bone. Bones are not weapons. With respect, sir, bones have been used as weapons by dozens of species throughout galactic history, including my own species. In fact, some of the earliest human weapons were made from bone. We got pretty good at it, actually. Yes, on your primitive homeworld, thousands of cycles ago. This is an advanced military academy. We use modern materials. You said I could use whatever material I wanted, as long as I could forge it into a functional blade." Her voice was still calm, but there was steel under it now. Metaphorical steel, not the literal kind she should have been using. "Those were your exact words. I have recordings of the lecture if you would like to verify." I opened my mouth, closed it, opened it again. My mandibles fluttered in agitation. She was right. Technically, completely, frustratingly right. Fine, I said, because what else could I say? But bone is organic material. It is brittle. It will shatter under combat stress. You are going to fail the practical demonstration even if you manage to shape it into something blade-like. Maybe, she agreed. Or maybe I know something about bone that you do not. And what exactly would that be? She smiled, and this time it was not mysterious or unsettling. It was the smile of someone who knows they are holding all the cards and is enjoying the moment before they lay them on the table. That would be telling, sir. Where is the fun in that? She stood up, wrapped the bone back in its cloth, and headed for the door. She paused at the threshold and looked back at me. 14 days, sir, I will have a functional blade. I promise. Then she was gone, leaving me sitting in my office, wondering what in the name of all the stars I had gotten myself into. The next 2 weeks were absolute agony. Mira showed up to class every single day, but she never worked in the main workshop. Instead, she requested access to one of the private forging rooms, the small chambers we usually reserve for students working with dangerous or unstable materials. I granted the request because, again, technically she had not broken any rules, and also because I was morbidly curious to see what disaster she was going to produce. The other students noticed her absence from the main workshop. The whispers got louder. I heard the human is using bone. That is insane. She is definitely going to fail. Do humans not understand metallurgy? I did not correct them. Let them think what they wanted. In 14 days, we would all find out together. Meanwhile, I had other students to worry about. Kelix presented her 6-grip titanium blade, and it was genuinely impressive. Thornick's folded steel sword was a work of art with patterns in the metal that looked like flowing water. Even the Kelpri student managed not to poison anyone with their resin blade, which was honestly better than I had expected. But in the back of my mind, through every presentation, every critique, every grade I assigned, I kept thinking about that human girl and her ridiculous bone. The day before the final examination, Mira submitted her formal request to present. It came through the official channels, all properly formatted, with all the required documentation attached. She had filled out every form correctly, dotted every I, crossed every T, or whatever the human equivalent of those phrases is. The final examination was held in the Academy Combat Arena. It was a large circular space with reinforced walls, multiple viewing platforms, and a floor that could be reconfigured into different terrain types. For blade testing purposes, we usually kept it simple. Flat, level ground, no distractions, just the student, their blade, and a series of targets and opponents that would test every aspect of their weapon's functionality. The stands filled with spectators, other instructors, students from different courses, a few military observers from the Caloreth Defense Force who liked to scout for promising recruits, even some civilian visitors who had heard that the humans had sent someone to the academy and wanted to see what all the fuss was about. I stood in the instructor box, which gave me a perfect view of the entire arena, and called up the first student. One by one, they came forward. One by one, they demonstrated their blades, cutting through synthetic flesh targets, parrying against training drones, demonstrating edge retention, balance, durability. Some passed easily, some barely scraped by. 2 failed completely when their weapons broke under stress. And then, finally, I called the last name on my list. Mira Kane. Human, please enter the arena. The crowd went silent. Even the usual background chatter and movement stopped. Everyone wanted to see this. She walked onto the arena floor from the preparation tunnel, and I got my first look at what she had created. Only stars above! It was beautiful. The bone had been shaped, carved, and polished until it gleamed under the arena lights like liquid moonlight. The natural curve of the femur had been enhanced and refined into a wicked forward curve that screamed danger. The thick end had been wrapped in some kind of textured material for grip, while the narrow end had been sharpened to a point so fine I could not see where it ended and air began. The entire length of the blade had been etched with patterns, designs that looked like they might be human writing or symbols or maybe just decoration. I could not tell from this distance. It was approximately 30 inches long. It looked absolutely lethal, and it was made entirely from bone. Mira stood in the center of the arena, holding her creation loosely in one hand, and looked up at me in the instructor box. "Instructor Vorath," she called out, her voice carrying clearly across the space. I present my blade for examination. I realized my mandibles were hanging open. I closed them with a click. Proceed with the demonstration, I managed to say. She nodded and turned to face the first target, and that is when things got really interesting. The first target was a standard synthetic flesh dummy, basically a mannequin filled with gel that approximates the density and resistance of organic tissue. We use them to test cutting power. A good blade should slice through cleanly with minimal resistance. A mediocre blade will drag and tear. A bad blade will bounce off or get stuck. Mira approached the target with a grace that honestly surprised me. For someone so small and seemingly fragile, she moved like a predator. Every step was calculated. Every muscle seemed coiled and ready. She did not swing wildly. She did not try to show off with fancy spins or unnecessary flourishes. She simply drew back, adjusted her stance, and struck. The bone blade went through the synthetic flesh like it was not even there. One clean cut. Diagonal slash from shoulder to hip. The dummy split apart and collapsed onto the arena floor in two neat pieces. The crowd murmured. I heard someone behind me whisper, "Did that just happen?" Yes, it just happened. But one cut proves nothing. Synthetic flesh is relatively easy to cut if your blade has any edge at all. The real tests come next. Proceed to target 2. I called out, trying to keep my voice steady and professional. Target 2 was metal. Specifically a column of soft aluminum alloy about 6 inches in diameter. This tests edge retention and cutting power against harder materials. Most student blades can cut it, but the effort required tells you a lot about the quality of the edge. Mira shifted her grip slightly, stepped into position, and swung. The bone blade bit into the metal with a sound like singing crystal. She pulled it through, and the column separated with a clean cross-section that gleamed under the arena lights. No jagged edges, no deformation, just a smooth, perfect cut. And when she pulled the blade back, I could see the edge clearly. Not a single chip, not a single roll. The bone had cut through metal without any visible damage. That should not be possible. That was absolutely, completely, fundamentally impossible. Bone is organic material, calcium-based. It has a hardness rating that puts it well below most metals. It should have shattered or at minimum dulled significantly the moment it hit that aluminum, but Mira's blade looked exactly the same as it had before the cut. What did she do to it? Someone muttered behind me. I turned and saw Professor Helkren, who teaches advanced materials science. She was staring at the arena with all 3 of her eyes wide open, which for a Kalreth means genuine shock. I have no idea, I admitted. Bone should not cut like that. It is not physically possible unless she treated it with something. Some kind of hardening process, but what process could change the fundamental molecular structure of organic material without destroying it completely? I guess we are about to find out, I said, because Mira was already moving toward Target 3. Target 3 is where most students start to struggle. It is a Durasteel plate, 2 inches thick, suspended between 2 posts. Durasteel is what we use for starship hulls. It is incredibly strong, incredibly resistant to cutting, and incredibly expensive. We only have 1 plate for testing, and we have to replace it every few semesters because students inevitably damage it. The test is not to cut through it. That is impossible for most hand-forged blades. The test is to see how deep a mark you can make. Anything over 1/4 inch is considered excellent. Most students manage maybe 1/8 of an inch if they are strong and their blade is well made. Mira studied the plate for a long moment. Then she did something that made my scales stand straight up again. She ran her thumb along the edge of her bone blade. Just dragged it across the sharpened edge like she was testing it. A thin line of red blood appeared on her skin. Is she insane? Kellex hissed from somewhere in the stands. Why would she cut herself right before a strength test? But I understood. I understood perfectly, and it made me respect the human even more, despite my better judgment. She was making a point. She was showing us that her blade was sharp enough to cut her own flesh without any pressure at all, that the edge was not just functional, but perfect. Then she turned to the Durasteel plate, adjusted her stance one more time, and swung with every ounce of strength in her small human body. The impact rang out like a bell. The sound echoed off the arena walls, sharp and clear and absolutely beautiful in its violence. Mira stepped back, and I activated the measurement scanners to check the depth of the cut, 1 3/4 inches. The number flashed on the display screens around the arena, and the crowd went absolutely silent. 1¾ inches into durasteel, with a blade made of bone, wielded by a human who probably weighed less than most people's luggage. That was not just excellent. That was record-breaking. That was better than some military-grade manufactured weapons. "How?" Professor Helkren said behind me, and her voice was barely a whisper. "How is that possible?" I activated the analysis protocols, which would scan Mira's blade and give us a complete molecular breakdown. The data started flooding across my display screen, and I read it once, then twice, then 3 times, because I simply could not believe what I was seeing. The bone had been treated with something, multiple somethings, actually. Chemical baths, heat cycles, pressure treatments. But it was not the treatments themselves that made the blade extraordinary. It was how she had applied them. Bone is not uniform. It has different densities in different areas. The outer cortical layer is hard and dense. The inner trabecular layer is porous and flexible. Most people trying to make a weapon from bone would just treat the whole thing uniformly and hope for the best. Mira had not done that. She had somehow, through what must have been weeks of painstaking work, treated each layer differently. She had hardened the cortical bone to the point where it matched some ceramic composites in durability. She had compressed the trabecular layer to eliminate weak points while maintaining just enough flexibility to prevent catastrophic shattering under impact. And she had done something to the molecular structure, some kind of polymer infusion that I did not even fully understand, that turned the entire blade into a hybrid material that was part organic, part synthetic, and entirely deadly. This was not just weapon forging. This was materials engineering at a level that would make most doctorate programs weep with envy. "The human," Professor Helkren said slowly, "appears to have reinvented metallurgy using biology." "Yeah," I agreed. "That is exactly what she did." But we were not done yet. The final test was still ahead, and it was the one that made most students nervous. "Live combat demonstration. Mira Kane," I called out, my voice booming across the arena. "You have passed the cutting and strength tests with exceptional marks. Now we move to practical combat application. You will face a training drone equipped with standard defensive protocols and armed with a regulation practice blade. You must demonstrate that your weapon can be effectively used in actual combat conditions. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir." Her voice was strong, confident, maybe even a little bit excited. I signaled the drone technician, and one of the training drones rolled out onto the arena floor. These things are purpose-built for combat testing. They are roughly humanoid in shape, about 7 feet tall, with articulated limbs and sophisticated programming that lets them fight at various skill levels. For student testing, we usually set them to intermediate difficulty, challenging enough to be meaningful but not so hard that it is impossible. I set this one to intermediate and activated it. The drone hummed to life, its optical sensors glowing blue as it scanned Mira and calculated her threat level. It drew its practice blade, which was a weighted training sword made of dense polymer, and took a Ethan stance. Mira rolled her shoulders, adjusted her grip on the bone blade, and waited. The drone struck first. It always does. The programming makes it take the initiative to test the student's defensive capabilities. The polymer blade came down in an overhead strike that would have been devastating if it connected. Mira sidestepped, casual as anything, and the drone's blade hit the arena floor with a clang. Before the drone could recover, Mira was inside its reach. She moved like water, like smoke, like something that did not have bones or mass or any of the physical limitations that should constrain a creature her size. The bone blade flicked out, once, twice, 3 times. 3 clean cuts across the drone's torso, each one deep enough that if this had been a living opponent, they would be bleeding out on the floor. The drone's programming recognized the hits and immediately shifted to aggressive mode. It started swinging faster, harder, using combinations and feints that would challenge even experienced warriors. Mira blocked, parried, redirected. Every movement was efficient, precise, and absolutely brutal in its effectiveness, and the bone blade held up to everything. Every impact against the drone's polymer sword, every clash, every stress point. The blade did not chip, did not crack, did not show any signs of weakness at all. She was not just surviving the combat test, she was dominating it. The drone tried a low sweep. Mira jumped over it and brought her blade down on the drone's shoulder joint in a move that would have severed an arm on a biological opponent. The drone registered critical damage and began its shutdown sequence. Mira stepped back, breathing hard but not exhausted, and held her bone blade at rest position. The drone powered down and slumped to the floor. The arena was dead silent. Then someone started clapping, slowly at first. Then others joined in. Then the entire crowd was on their feet, applauding, cheering, making whatever noises of approval their species was capable of producing. I looked down at the analysis data on my screen one more time. At the molecular scans, at the performance metrics, at the combat effectiveness ratings. This ridiculous bone blade that should not exist, that violated several principles of conventional metallurgy, that came from the corpse of an animal that died in a random territorial dispute, was one of the best weapons I had seen produced in my 17 cycles of teaching. I activated my communicator and spoke directly to Mira, whose audio implant would pick up my voice. "Mira Kain, please approach the instructor box." She walked across the arena floor, still holding her blade, and looked up at me from below. The crowd settled down, curious about what would happen next. I should have given her a pass mark, congratulated her on a job well done, moved on to the final grades and semester wrap-up. But I am an instructor, which means I am also fundamentally nosy and unable to leave mysteries unsolved. "Mira," I said, loud enough for the arena to hear, "I need you to answer a question for me. Why bone? With access to all the materials in our vault, with all the advanced alloys and composites at your disposal, why did you choose to use bone?" She smiled up at me, and this time there was no mystery in it. Just pure, honest amusement. "Because, sir, everyone else was going to use the materials in the vault. They were going to make perfectly good, perfectly conventional blades using perfectly established techniques. And that is fine. That is what you taught us to do. But humans, well, we have this thing we do, this instinct, I guess. When everyone else goes high-tech, we go back to basics. When everyone else reaches for the newest and shiniest option, we look at what nature already provided and ask ourselves how we can make it better." She held up the bone blade, letting the arena lights catch its polished surface. "My ancestors made weapons from bones when they were barely sapient. They cracked open animal carcasses and used the pieces to hunt, to fight, to survive. And yeah, those weapons were crude and simple and nothing compared to what we can make now. But the principle was sound. Bone is strong. Bone is flexible. Bone is available anywhere there is life. So, I thought, what if I took that ancient principle and combined it with everything I have learned at this academy? What if I treated bone not as a primitive fallback, but as a legitimate material with unique properties that could be enhanced?" She paused, looking around at the silent crowd. And I was right. Bone has a natural structure that metal cannot replicate. It is designed by evolution to absorb impacts without shattering, to flex without breaking, to heal itself under stress. I could not make it heal, obviously, but I could enhance everything else. Make it harder, make it sharper, make it better, and the result is a blade that is just as effective as anything forged from your vault materials, but it is also unique. It is mine. It tells a story about where I come from and what my species values. She lowered the blade and looked directly at me with those weird little human eyes. "You asked us to forge a blade that would be an extension of ourselves, sir. This is mine. This is human. We take what others discard, what others overlook, and we make it deadly." The crowd erupted again, louder this time. I saw Professor Helkrin dabbing at her eye clusters with a cloth, which is what Calrith do when they are emotionally moved. Even Kellix, who had been so dismissive earlier, was making approving gestures with all 6 of her arms. I looked down at Mira Kain, this tiny human who had somehow taught an entire military academy a lesson about innovation and perspective, and I felt something I had not felt in cycles: pride. Not in myself, but in a student. "Mira Kain," I said formally, my voice carrying across the arena, "you have not only passed this examination, you have exceeded every expectation I had. Your blade demonstrates mastery of material science, engineering principles, and combat application. Your performance today will be recorded in the Academy archives as an example of exceptional work. Congratulations." I paused, then added, "And thank you for reminding this old instructor that sometimes the best solutions are not found in high-tech vaults, but in looking at old problems with new eyes." She grinned. Actually grinned, showing her blunt little human teeth. "Thank you, sir. Does this mean I pass?" "You pass with highest honors, you ridiculous human. Now get off my arena floor before I change my mind." She laughed and jogged toward the exit tunnel, bone blade held high while the crowd continued to cheer. Later that evening, After all the grades were finalized and all the students had left to celebrate or commiserate depending on their results, I sat in my office and wrote my end-of-semester report. Normally these reports are dry, technical documents. Student names, grade distributions, notes on curriculum effectiveness. But this time, I added a special section at the end. Recommendation for future curriculum development, I typed. It is suggested that instructors consider expanding material options beyond the standard vault inventory. Students should be encouraged to explore unconventional materials and approaches, as this may lead to innovations that advance the field of weapons development. Reference student ID 7731 Kane M for example of successful unconventional approach. I sent the report off to the academy administrators and leaned back in my chair, feeling my carapace creak with the movement. The thing about humans I was beginning to realize was not that they were particularly strong or fast or technologically advanced. Plenty of species had them beat in those categories. The thing about humans was that they looked at the universe differently. They saw potential where others saw waste. They saw opportunities where others saw limitations. They took something as simple as a piece of bone and turned it into a weapon that could match military-grade alloys. And they did it with a smile, making it look easy, while probably laughing at everyone who thought they were crazy. I had a feeling that the galaxy was going to be dealing with human surprises for a very long time. My communicator chimed. Incoming message from the Academy Commandant. Instructor Vorith, I have just read your end-of-semester report. Specifically, the section about the human student and her bone blade. I need you to understand something. The Galactic Military Council has already reached out asking if they can study the weapon. Apparently, word of today's demonstration has spread faster than a plasma fire. They want to know if bone treatment could be a viable approach for low-resource military operations. What have you done? I thought about that for a moment, about Mira Kine and her ridiculous, brilliant, impossible blade. About how one small human had walked into my classroom and completely upended my assumptions about what was possible. I taught a class, sir, I replied. The student did the rest. The student, the commandant wrote back, has started what my analysts are calling a materials revolution. Do you have any idea how many species are now looking at biological materials in completely new ways? We are getting requests from engineering firms, military contractors, research institutions. Everyone wants to know more about what the human did. I smiled, which probably looked terrifying to anyone who walked past my office at that moment. Good, I typed. Maybe it is about time someone shook things up around here. 3 days later, I was back in my workshop preparing for the next semester. New students would arrive soon, new challenges, new projects. The cycle continues, as it always does, but this time I had made one small change to my opening day speech. Welcome to Advanced Blade Crafting, I would say. You are here because someone somewhere decided you have potential. In this course, you will learn the ancient art of weapon forging. You will forge your own blade, from raw materials to finished product. You will use any techniques you have learned, any cultural traditions you bring with you, any innovations you can think of. And then I would add a new line. You have access to our materials vault, which contains samples from hundreds of worlds. But you also have access to an entire universe of materials that most people never consider. Last semester, a student made a blade from bone. It was one of the finest weapons I have ever seen, so do not limit yourself to the obvious choices. Look around. Think creatively. Find something that speaks to who you are and where you come from. Then make it deadly. I leaned against my workbench, looking at the empty stations that would soon fill with eager students, and felt something I had not felt in a long time. Excitement for the next semester, because if one human with a piece of bone could surprise me this much, what were 63 new students going to come up with? Only time would tell. But I had a feeling it was going to be interesting, and by interesting, I mean absolutely chaotic in the best possible way. Somewhere across campus, in her dormitory, Mira Kane was probably already planning her next impossible project. Probably already looking at something everyone else dismissed as useless and figuring out how to turn it into something extraordinary. That is what humans do, apparently. They take the discarded, the overlooked, the ancient, and they make it new. They sharpen bones and challenge the galaxy to keep up. And honestly, I could not wait to see what they came up with next.